15th of October 1972, the Reverend Wilbur Awdry released his 26th and final book, Tramway Engines, thus completing the Railway series. Since then, his books have spanned generations of children and adults alike and spawned the beloved series Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends. Most normies believe the stories ended with Wilbur, as they are the most widely available to casual audiences. But for the seasoned Thomas and Friends fan, there's more than just these books. When the Reverend hung up his pen, his son Christopher Awdry took up the mantle and released another 15 books, starting with Really Useful Engines in 1983 and ending his run with Thomas and his Friends on the 6th of July 2011, taking the total count to 42 books. Christopher's books were dubbed the New Collection, and books 27 to 41 were released as a compilation book in September 2007. If you've been paying attention, this means that book 42 was not released at this point, making it a particularly elusive find among collectors. Christopher's series of books as a whole were not as well received as his father's earlier work. Several reasons have been floated around, such as continuity errors and the quality of the illustrations, but the overall consensus was that the stories weren't as good as his father's. While I agree they aren't as strong as his father's previous work, I personally like Christopher's new collection, and I think it's unfair that Christopher's work isn't as widely available to purchase. People in the Thomas fandom consider the Railway series their Bible, and not having both testaments is a particular bugbear among the community. So I decided to make this little video giving my reasons as to why I think they should re-release the new collection of the Railway series. As previously stated, the Railway series didn't end with Wilbur's books. Christopher's books carry on the stories set up by his father. In an age of reboots, you would be forgiven for thinking the new collection is a retelling of Wilbur's work, but not only does Christopher carry on the legacy, he builds upon it. New characters such as Jock, Wilbur, Frank, and Pip and Emma are added to the already expansive lore of characters. While some like Ivo Hugh are only used in an extremely reduced capacity, other characters become quite crucial to the story going forward, Pip and Emma being the prime example. Not only do they provide us with a new type of engine, specifically a British Rail Class 43 high-speed train, they become instrumental to the ongoing character arc of Gordon, one of the original protagonists of the series. With this being a continuation of his father's work, not only does Christopher have to create new characters, but expand upon the already established lore of the previous ones. This is evident with the character of Gordon, who is now entering his twilight years at the start of this run. With Pip and Emma arriving on Sodor, the passing of the torch is more evident, especially in the book Gordon the High-Speed Engine. While Gordon fights on in this book, the evidence is clear that his retirement is no longer a case of if, but when. And by the time the final book is released, that's exactly what happens. Check out the Unlucky Tugs video on Gordon, Sodor's finest engine, for more information. James's prejudice against diesels is also resolved in this collection of stories. True, it's an abrupt way that it ends, but it is an arc that's completed under Christopher's watch. Toby gains a new coach called Victoria, Henry gets yet another overhaul, and Thomas winds up at the Great Railway Show. True, characters like Percy, Edward, Duck, and so on don't have very much of anything to do, but we still get to see what their day-to-day life is like for them during this time. In the final book, we even get a bust of Wilbur Awdry unveiled at the big station. In 1986, Season 2 of Thomas and Friends aired, and during this time, the show was only allowed to use stories written by the Awdry family, and Christopher, at the behest of the publishers, wrote another book, aptly titled More About Thomas the Tank Engine. The stories in this book included Thomas, Percy and Nicole, The Runaway, Better Late Than Never, and Drip Tank. 3 of these stories were adapted for the second season, and at the time, were not held in the highest of regard by fans and critics. I remember watching Thomas, Percy and Nicole in particular as a child and thinking that the resolution was quite abrupt. Then I read the book that it was based on and realised that there was a different resolution to Thomas and Percy's arc through the story Drip Tank. Not having this story adapted for television, in my opinion, hurt the series and made casual audiences feel like Christopher's writing was subpar. What many people don't realise is that while Christopher may not have had the same level of consistency as his father, he was no slouch with a pen. There are several Christopher Awdry stories that, if adapted for the small screen, could have been real gems in the TV canon. Such episodes include Triple Header, Drip Tank, Old Stuck Up, the full book of Gordon the High-Speed Engine, Jock, if it was adapted into the Arsdale Engine's CGI canon, Toby's Megatrain, and Cab Over Wheels. All of these stories, as well as an adaptation of Thomas and the Swan and Gordon's Fire Service into one 2-part episode, would have made some great viewing for fans of Thomas and Friends, new and old, and show people that when left to his own devices, Christopher could craft a great story. While his narrow gauge episodes left a lot to be desired, and there were continuity errors with Jock the New Engine, his dedication to the Railway series cannot be called into question. As I mentioned previously, there are a lot of people in the fan community who are crying out for a re-release of the new collection. This is because they are so hard to come by, and as such, anyone selling copies of these books can charge ridiculous amounts for them online. I was very fortunate to get a copy of the new collection in 2022 for a reasonably fair price, but afterwards I looked to see what a copy of the book would go for online, and quite frankly, it was extortionate. Thomas fans are not the most flush with cash at the best of times, but one thing that we want, like all collectors do, is to be treated fairly. At the time of this recording, I myself still don't have Book 42, the final Railway series book, and when I see how much it's valued for, if it ever became available, it just makes me sick to my stomach. Having a gap in your collection, no matter what you collect, can gnaw away at you. And Book 42 is certainly gnawing away at a lot of people in the fandom, myself included. You would think that the final books of a series that spanned 66 years would be more readily available to the fans, especially the ones that keep the legacy and spirit of the beloved franchise alive. Instead, it's being left to scammers and con artists who play on this rarity to extort money. Maybe I'm too naive, or I'm just plain dumb, but Thomas and Friends should be for everyone, not just for the more affluent members of society. So what would be my solution to this little conundrum that we find ourselves in? At the time of this recording, the Railway series just celebrated its 78th anniversary of the release of the 3 Railway Engines book. This means that in 2025 we will be celebrating 80 years of the Railway series. What better time to re-release these stories as one complete collection with both Wilbert and Christopher's stories in one big book. All 42 books together at last, the Old and New Testament of our Thomas and Friends Bible. Heck, even re-release the Island of Sodor book while you're at it. Lots of people love the lore of the Island of Sodor in the Railway series, but only have PDF copies of it. In an age where everything is becoming digitised, there are still some out there, like myself, who celebrate physical media. I think we're so obsessed with embracing the future of technology that we haven't stopped to realise that some things in the past were still pretty damn great. I love pulling out a book of the Railway series and reading it to my kids at bedtime, and I know there's a lot of other people that feel the same way. Most of this video was scripted up to this point because I wanted to make sure that I had all my points in a clear and concise format, but the conclusion is coming straight from the heart. I think if anybody has a passion and a love for Thomas and Friends, the Railway series, and physical media as a whole, should get behind this idea. We've got 2 years to try and get something together that we can create this new, complete collection of stories, so everybody who is a fan of Thomas, young and old, will finally have the complete collection of the Railway series books, both Wilbur Awdry's and Christopher Awdry's. And what a celebration that would be. Thank you all for listening, and until next time, keep on chugging.